The blood-red sun beat down mercilessly upon the cracked earth as Royce Vance squinted against the horizon, his weathered hand adjusting the brim of his hat. Something unusual caught his eye, an unnatural shape, breaking the flat monotony of the desert landscape. Drawing his horse to a halt, he felt an inexplicable pull toward whatever lay dying in the New Mexico Badlands, unaware that his entire life was about to change with a single detour. It was 1878, 5 years since Royce had claimed his modest ranch, 10 miles outside of Deeming, New Mexico territory. At 32, he'd carved out a respectable existence, but remained a solitary figure, more comfortable among his cattle than the townsfolk, who regarded him with a mixture of respect and wariness. The war had changed him, as it had so many men, leaving him with nightmares he never discussed, and a preference for wide open spaces where memories couldn't corner him so easily. As he approached the strange shape, his bay mare nickered nervously. Royce's hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver on his hip, a habit from years spent in territories where danger lurked behind every rock and cactus. The shape materialized into a human form, sprawled face down in the sand. "Hello," he called out, voice rough from disuse. No response came. Dismounting with caution, Royce approached the figure. A woman lay unconscious, her once fine traveling dress torn and sun-bleached, her exposed skin angry with sunburn. Her dark hair was matted with dust and blood from a wound at her temple. Kneeling beside her, he gently rolled her onto her back, placing his calloused fingers against her neck, searching for signs of life. A faint pulse fluttered against his fingertips. She was alive barely. "Madam," Royce said, then louder, "Madam, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Her lips, cracked from dehydration, parted slightly on an exhale. Without hesitation, Royce uncorked his canteen and trickled a few drops of water between her lips, careful not to give her too much at once. Some of it dribbled down her chin, but she swallowed reflexively. "There you go," he murmured. "Just a little now." Looking around, he saw no sign of a horse, wagon, or traveling companions. Whatever had brought her to this desolate stretch of desert remained a mystery, but solving it would have to wait. She wouldn't survive another hour under the punishing sun. With gentle efficiency born of handling injured ranch hands, Royce wrapped her in his spare blanket and lifted her onto his horse. Mounting behind her, he cradled her limp form against his chest, one arm secured around her waist as he turned his horse toward home. "Hang on, miss," he said softly, though he doubted she could hear him. "Just hang on." The ride back to his ranch seemed interminable. Every jolt of the horse's movement drew a whimper from the unconscious woman, cutting through Royce like a knife. He found himself whispering reassurances, something he hadn't done since comforting wounded soldiers during the war. When his modest ranch house finally came into view, a sturdy 2-room structure with a covered porch and small stable, Royce felt a surge of relief. He'd never been so grateful for the isolation that now afforded him privacy to tend to the mysterious woman without prying eyes or gossip. Dismounting carefully, he carried her inside and laid her on his bed. Up close, in the dim light filtering through his curtained windows, he could better assess her condition. She was younger than he'd initially thought, perhaps in her mid-20s, with fine features beneath the grime and sunburn. Her hands, though dirty, showed no calluses, not a woman accustomed to physical labor. Royce set to work with methodical care. He cleaned the wound on her temple, revealing a nasty gash that had thankfully stopped bleeding. He bathed her face and hands with cool water, noting with concern the heat radiating from her skin. Sun fever had set in. Unable to do more without compromising her modesty, he covered her with a light sheet, and set about making a broth from yesterday's rabbit stew. As the broth simmered, he sat beside the bed, studying the woman's face and wondering about her story. No wedding ring marked her finger, though that didn't necessarily mean anything. Her clothing, despite its current state, was of good quality, not the practical garments of a frontier woman but the traveling attire of someone from back east. "Who are you?" he asked softly. "And what in God's name were you doing out there alone?" Night fell, and Royce maintained his vigil. Every hour he roused her enough to take a few sips of water or broth. Sometimes her eyes would flutter open, revealing startling blue irises that seemed to look through him before closing again. By midnight, her fever had worsened, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Royce knew he needed help. At dawn, he reluctantly rode to town, straight to the home of Mrs. Patterson, the closest thing Deeming had to a doctor since old Doc Williams had passed. The widow had nursed countless townsfolk through everything from childbirth to bullet wounds. "A woman, Mrs. Patterson repeated, her gray eyebrows shooting up as Royce explained the situation. "You found her just lying in the desert?" "Yes, madam. She's in a bad way. Fever, dehydration, and a head wound." The older woman studied him, her shrewd eyes taking his measure. "You did right to come get me, Mr. Vance. Let me gather my things." They rode back together, Mrs. Patterson surprisingly spry in the saddle despite her 60 years. At the ranch, she took immediate command of the sick room. "Fetch more clean water and any clean cloths you have," she ordered. "Then make yourself scarce. I need to undress her and get her properly cleaned up." Royce complied without argument, retreating to his small kitchen to prepare coffee and tend to chores while the older woman worked. An hour later, Mrs. Patterson emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. "She's been beaten," she said bluntly. "Bruises all over, days old, and there's rope marks on her wrists. Someone tied her up and likely dumped her out there to die." Royce felt a surge of anger so intense it momentarily stole his breath. "Will she live? If we can break the fever, maybe." "I've dressed her in one of your shirts, hope you don't mind. Her clothes need washing, and I suspect she'd burn them if she could." Mrs. Patterson accepted the coffee he offered. "She's young, strong, that's in her favor. Did she wake at all? Say anything?" "No, but she fought me in her delirium. Called out once something about not going back. Whatever happened to her, she was running from it." The older woman fixed him with a stern look. "This could bring trouble, Mr. Vance. You understand that?" Royce nodded grimly. He knew well how trouble could follow a person like a shadow. "I'll stay today to help, but I can't abandon my own place for long," Mrs. Patterson continued. "Can I trust you to behave honorably with an unconscious woman under your roof?" "Yes, madam," Royce replied, straightening his shoulders. "I give you my word." For 3 days, the woman hovered between life and death, her fever spiking dangerously before finally breaking on the 4th morning. Royce had slept little, spending nights in a chair beside the bed, ready to hold her down when fever dreams made her thrash and cry out. Mrs. Patterson came daily, bringing clean bandages and tinctures of herbs to help with healing. It was dawn on the 5th day when Royce, dozing in the chair, was awakened by the sensation of being watched. He opened his eyes to find the woman's bright blue gaze fixed on him, clear and alert for the first time. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Then she tried to speak, her voice barely a whisper. "Water." Royce quickly poured a cup from the pitcher beside the bed, helping her raise her head to drink. She gulped greedily until he gently pulled the cup away. "Easy now. Too much at once will make you sick." She sank back against the pillow, studying him with wary eyes. "Who are you?" Her voice was hoarse but carried the refined accent of an educated Eastern woman. "Royce Vance. This is my ranch outside Deeming." "Deeming," She repeated, confusion clouding her features. New Mexico territory. Yes, madam. How did I get here? I found you in the desert about 10 miles south. You were half dead from sun and thirst. He watched her carefully. Do you remember how you came to be there? Fear flashed across her face, quickly masked. No, she lied, looking away. I don't remember anything. Royce didn't press. Whatever had happened, she wasn't ready to speak of it. What's your name, madam? She hesitated, as if weighing something in her mind. Faith, she finally said. Faith Ellis. Well, Miss Ellis, you've been mighty sick. Mrs. Patterson from town has been helping tend to you, but you need more rest before you're on your feet again. Faith's hand moved to her temple, fingers gingerly touching the bandage there. How long have I been here? 5 days now. Her eyes widened. 5 days. She tried to sit up but fell back with a gasp of pain. Please don't strain yourself, Royce said, instinctively reaching toward her before pulling his hand back. You're safe here. Whatever happened before, whatever you're running from, you're safe for now. Faith stared at him, vulnerability and suspicion battling in her expression. Why are you helping me? The question caught Royce off guard. It hadn't occurred to him to do anything else. Couldn't just leave you to die out there, he said simply. Something in his straightforward response seemed to reassure her. She nodded slightly, then winced at the movement. You should rest more, Royce said, standing. I'll bring you something to eat soon. Mrs. Patterson will be by later. I'm sure she'll be pleased to see you awake. As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. Mr. Vance, he looked back. Yes, Miss Ellis, thank you, she said softly, for my life. The simple gratitude in her words stirred something in him that he'd thought long buried. Nodding awkwardly, Royce left the room, feeling strangely unsettled. In the kitchen, he leaned against the counter, letting out a long breath. There was something about Faith Ellis that didn't add up. The refinement in her speech, the quality of what remained of her clothing, the way she carried herself even in illness. She wasn't a frontier woman. And despite her claim of memory loss, the fear in her eyes when he'd asked about her past told him she remembered perfectly well how she'd ended up in that desert. But it wasn't his place to demand answers. Everyone had secrets, himself included. For now, it was enough that she would live. Over the next few days, Faith grew stronger. Mrs. Patterson pronounced her out of danger, but insisted she needed at least 2 more weeks of rest before attempting travel. Faith accepted this verdict with a calmness that suggested she had nowhere pressing to go, or that, wherever she needed to be, she was in no hurry to get there. With Mrs. Patterson's help, they established a routine that preserved propriety. Faith remained in Royce's bedroom while he slept on a bedroll in the main room. During the day, when she felt strong enough, Faith would sit on the covered porch, wrapped in a quilt despite the heat, staring out at the vast landscape as if seeking answers in the distance. 1 week after she'd first awoken, Royce returned from tending his cattle to find Faith in his small kitchen, leaning heavily on a chair but determinedly stirring something in a pot. "What are you doing?" he asked, more surprised than angry. She startled slightly but didn't turn. "Making dinner." "It seemed the least I could do after all your kindness." Royce noted the pallor beneath her healing sunburn, the slight tremor in her hands. "You should be resting." "I've rested enough," she said firmly. "I'm not an invalid, Mr. Vance." "Royce," he corrected automatically. After a week of caring for her most basic needs, formality seemed absurd. A small smile touched her lips. "Royce, then, and I'm Faith." He moved to take the spoon from her, but she held it away. "Please," she said quietly, "let me do this. I need to feel useful." Something in her expression stopped him, a desperate need for normalcy, for purpose. He recognized it all too well from his own darkest days after the war. "All right," he conceded, "but sit while you stir, and I'll handle anything that needs lifting." They worked together in companionable silence, Faith directing from her seated position while Royce fetched ingredients. The stew she created from his simple provisions smelled better than anything that had come from his kitchen in years. As they ate at his small table, Royce found himself studying her. The bruises on her face had faded to yellowish shadows, and her dark hair, washed and brushed by Mrs. Patterson, fell in soft waves past her shoulders. She'd lost weight during her ordeal, making her cheekbones stand out prominently, but there was a quiet dignity in the way she held herself. "Tell me about Deeming," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Not much to tell. Small town but growing since the railroad came through." "And this ranch? Have you been here long?" "5 years. Built the house myself." Royce wasn't accustomed to talking about himself, but something in Faith's interested expression encouraged him. "Started with just a few cattle, doing better now, not rich but comfortable enough." "No family?" she asked, then immediately looked down. "I'm sorry, that's too personal." "No, it's all right." Royce set down his fork. "No family, parents passed years ago, had a brother but he didn't make it back from the war." Faith's eyes softened with empathy. "I'm sorry, you were close." "Twins," Royce said simply, the single word conveying a lifetime of connection. She nodded, understanding without needing more explanation. "The war took so much from so many." "You lost someone too," a shadow crossed her face. "My father. He wasn't a soldier, he was a doctor. Went south to help the wounded and never came home." It was the first personal detail she'd shared, and Royce sensed it was significant that she'd chosen to reveal it. That was brave of him. He believed in helping people, regardless of which side they fought for. Faith's voice held a mixture of pride and old pain. "My mother always said he saw the person, not the uniform." "Sounds like a good man." "He was." She fell silent, twisting her napkin in her lap. After a moment she asked, "Do you have a telegram office in Deeming?" The question seemed casual, but Royce noticed the tension in her shoulders. "Yes. Need to send a message to someone?" "No," she said quickly, too quickly. "Just wondering." Royce didn't press. Instead, he said, "Mrs. Patterson brought some clothing for you yesterday. Said they belonged to her daughter before she married and moved to Santa Fe. They're in the chest at the foot of the bed." Faith's expression brightened with genuine gratitude. "That's very kind. I'll have to thank her properly. She's coming by tomorrow. Said she'd bring a proper dress if you're feeling up to joining us for Sunday service." Surprise registered on Faith's face. "You attend church regularly?" Royce smiled slightly. "Not as regular as Mrs. Patterson would like, but often enough. Small towns notice if you never show your face in church." "I suppose they would," Faith murmured, looking thoughtful. "I'd like that if I'm strong enough." Later, as Royce washed their dishes, he found himself wondering about Faith's reaction to the telegram office. Was there someone she needed to contact or someone she was avoiding? The question nagged at him as he prepared for bed, spreading his blanket on the floor near the fireplace. In the quiet darkness, he heard Faith's voice from the bedroom doorway. "Royce, are you awake?" He sat up. "Yes." "Do you need something?" She stood in the doorway, a silhouette wrapped in a quilt. "I just wanted to say, I know what an imposition this has been. Having a stranger in your home, giving up your bed, I'm grateful." "It's no hardship," he replied honestly. Faith hesitated, then said softly, "Good night, then." "Good night, Faith." He listened to her retreating footsteps, puzzling over the woman who had so unexpectedly entered his life. Despite her outward fragility, he sensed a core of steel beneath a survivor's determination. Whatever had happened to her, whatever she was running from, Faith Ellis was not a woman who broke easily. The thought gave him an odd sense of admiration, followed by a protective instinct he hadn't felt in years. Dangerous feelings for a man who'd sworn off emotional entanglements. Faith would recover, move on, and his life would return to its solitary rhythm. But as sleep claimed him, Royce couldn't shake the unsettling sense that nothing would ever be quite the same again. Sunday dawned bright and clear. Royce rose early to complete his chores, returning to find Faith dressed in one of Mrs. Patterson's daughter's simple calico dresses, her hair neatly arranged. Standing in the main room, she looked like a different person from the half-dead woman he'd found in the desert. "Will I do?" she asked, a touch of nervousness in her voice. "You look fine," Royce said, the understatement of the year. In truth, she was striking the simple dress emphasizing her slender figure, the blue fabric bringing out the vivid color of her eyes. Mrs. Patterson arrived shortly after, clucking approvingly over Faith's appearance and improved condition. "You'll be turning heads at church, my dear," she said with a wink. "Half the unmarried men in Deeming will be falling over themselves to help you to your seat." Faith blushed prettily. "I doubt that very much, Mrs. Patterson." Royce found himself unreasonably annoyed at the thought of other men admiring Faith. Pushing the feeling aside, he helped both women into his wagon for the trip to town. Deeming's small church was filled to capacity when they arrived. As Mrs. Patterson had predicted, Faith's appearance caused a stir. The mysterious woman rescued from the desert by the reclusive Royce Vance was too intriguing a story for the townsfolk to resist. Reverend Taylor greeted them warmly, shaking Royce's hand with unusual vigor. "Good to see you, Mr. Vance. And this must be the young lady Mrs. Patterson told us about. Welcome to our congregation, Miss Ellis." "Thank you, Reverend," Faith replied with perfect composure, though Royce noticed how she shrank slightly from the curious stares of the congregants. Throughout the service, he was acutely aware of Faith beside him, her shoulder occasionally brushing his when she shifted in the hard pew. She sang the hymns in a clear, sweet voice, seeming to find comfort in the familiar ritual of worship. After the service, Mrs. Patterson insisted they accept Sheriff Miller's invitation to Sunday dinner. "It'll do the girl good to be around people," she whispered to Royce. "And Martha Miller sets a fine table." Reluctantly, Royce agreed. He'd avoided social gatherings for years, but Faith needed proper food and female company. His discomfort was a small price to pay for her recovery. The Miller home was modest but comfortable, with Sheriff John Miller and his wife Martha welcoming them enthusiastically. Their teenage daughter Emma immediately took to Faith, peppering her with questions about the latest Eastern fashions that Faith parried with good humor. "So, Miss Ellis," Sheriff Miller said as they sat down to a roast chicken dinner, "Mrs. Patterson tells me you had quite an ordeal. Any recollection yet of how you came to be out in that desert?" Royce tensed, noticing the way Faith's knuckles whitened around her fork. "I'm afraid not, Sheriff," she replied smoothly. "The doctor in my hometown warned that head injuries can affect memory. I recall traveling west, but after that." She shrugged delicately. "Where exactly is home, dear?" Martha Miller asked. "Boston, originally. My mother passed last year, and I was traveling to stay with relatives in California." The lie came so naturally that Royce almost believed it himself. "Traveling alone," Sheriff Miller pressed, his lawman's instincts clearly unsatisfied. "John," his wife admonished, "don't interrogate our guest." "It's quite all right," Faith assured her. "I wasn't alone, Sheriff. I was traveling with a family friend, but I'm afraid I can't recall what became of him." Her voice trembled slightly, and Royce realized she was deliberately playing up her vulnerability to deflect suspicion. It worked. Sheriff Miller's expression softened. "Well, perhaps it'll come back to you in time. Meanwhile, you're welcome in Deeming for as long as you need." "That's very kind," Faith murmured, shooting Royce a quick, relieved glance. The rest of the meal passed pleasantly. with conversation turning to local matters, cattle prices, the upcoming Founders' Day celebration, and gossip about the new schoolteacher expected to arrive by month's end. As they prepared to leave, Martha pressed a basket of fresh bread and preserves into Faith's hands. "For your strength, dear, and please come visit any time. It gets lonely out on those ranches." "Thank you," Faith said with genuine warmth. "You've all been so kind." On the ride home with Mrs. Patterson dozing in the back of the wagon, Royce finally spoke the thought that had been bothering him all afternoon. "You lied to them." Faith didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Yes." "Why?" She was silent for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she said quietly, "Because the truth would endanger both them and me." The simple statement confirmed his suspicions that she was running from something serious. "Faith, if you're in trouble, please," she interrupted, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Don't ask me to explain." "Not yet. I just need time." Royce studied her profile in the fading light, seeing the fear she tried so hard to hide. Whatever haunted Faith, Ellis was real enough. His protective instincts surged again, stronger this time. "All right," he conceded. "But if there's trouble coming, I need to know what to watch for." Faith turned to look at him, surprise evident in her expression. "You'd help me, even not knowing what I'm running from. I could be a criminal for all you know," Royce snorted. "Are you?" "No," she said firmly. "I've broken no laws." "Then that's enough for now." He wasn't sure why he trusted her, only that he did. Perhaps it was the dignity with which she bore her suffering, or the kindness she showed to everyone from Mrs. Patterson to the miller's shy daughter. The relief in Faith's eyes was palpable. "Thank you," she whispered, her gloved hand briefly touching his arm. That slight contact sent an unexpected warmth through Royce, catching him off guard. He focused intently on the road ahead, disturbed by his growing feelings for a woman whose past remained a mystery, a woman who would likely leave once she was fully recovered. But as the days passed, Faith showed no signs of preparing to depart. She grew stronger, taking on small household tasks and even helping with garden chores. Mrs. Patterson's visits became less frequent as Faith's recovery progressed, leaving Royce and Faith increasingly alone together. They established an easy routine. Mornings, Royce would tend to the cattle while Faith prepared breakfast. Afternoons, she would read from one of his few books while he worked on ranch projects. Evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in fiery hues. It was during these quiet moments that Faith began to share fragments of her past safe memories that revealed her character without exposing whatever danger she fled. She spoke of growing up in Boston, her father's medical practice, her love of music and literature. She described sailing on the harbor with her cousin, learning to make her mother's famous apple tarts, and the stray cat she'd secretly fed despite her mother's prohibition against pets. In return, Royce found himself sharing stories he'd told no one about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his close bond with his twin brother Robert, their decision to fight for the Union despite their mother's tears. He even spoke of the battle where Robert fell, the memory still raw despite the passing years. "I was supposed to be the one leading that charge," he told Faith one evening, his voice low with old guilt. "But I'd twisted my ankle the night before, so Robert took my place. He died in my stead." Faith's hand found his in the gathering darkness. "That's not your fault, Royce. In my head, I know that. But here," he pressed his free hand to his chest, "I still feel I cheated death, took my brother's place in the world." "Perhaps," Faith said gently, "you were spared for a reason." The words hung between them, weighted with possibility. Royce was acutely aware of her hand in his, warm and trusting. Without conscious thought, his thumb traced small circles on her skin. "Faith," he began, uncertain what he wanted to say but feeling the need to say something. Before he could continue, the distant sound of hoofbeats broke the spell. Faith tensed immediately, withdrawing her hand and standing. "Are you expecting visitors?" she asked, anxiety evident in her voice. "No." Royce rose, instinctively moving between Faith and the approaching rider. "Get inside." She hesitated. "Royce, please," he said firmly, "just to be safe." Faith nodded and retreated into the house while Royce stepped forward, hand resting casually near his holstered revolver. As the rider drew closer, he relaxed slightly, recognizing the silhouette of Sheriff Miller. "Evening, Sheriff," Royce called as the lawman reined in his horse. "You're out late." "Evening, Vance." Miller dismounted, looking grim. "Need a word with you and Miss Ellis if she's up to it." Royce's unease returned. "What's this about?" The sheriff glanced toward the house. "Received a telegram today. Man asking about a missing woman matching Miss Ellis's description. Says she's his fiancé, disappeared on their journey west." A cold weight settled in Royce's stomach. "Did this man give his name?" "Gerard Blackstone. Says he's a businessman from Philadelphia." Miller studied Royce carefully. Miss Ellis mentioned a traveling companion she couldn't recall. "Could be him." "Could be," Royce agreed neutrally, though instinct told him otherwise. Faith's fear had been too genuine, her bruises too real. "She's inside, I'll fetch her." He found Faith standing just inside the door, her face pale in the lamplight. "You heard," she nodded, visibly trembling. "It's him. He found me." "The man who hurt you?" Royce's question was barely audible. Faith nodded again, her eyes wide with fear. "Royce, I can't." "You don't have to," he assured her. "But we need to tell Miller something." She shook her head frantically. "You don't understand. Gerard is wealthy, influential. He has connections everywhere, even with law enforcement. No one believed me before, they won't now." "I believe you," Royce said firmly. "And Miller's a good man. Let me talk to him." After a moment's hesitation, Faith nodded, squaring her shoulders. "All right, but let me do the talking." They stepped outside together, Faith's composure restored through sheer force of will. Sheriff Miller tipped his hat to her respectfully. "Miss Ellis, you're looking well." "Thank you, Sheriff. Mr. Vance tells me you've received an inquiry about me." Miller nodded. "Man named Blackstone claims you're his fiancé. Says you had an accident on your journey and wandered off while he sought help. He's been searching for weeks." Faith's laugh held no humor. "Is that what he's saying? How convenient for him to rewrite history." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "So you do remember this man?" "Unfortunately, yes." Faith's voice was steady now, determined. "Gerard Blackstone was never my fiancé, though he pressured me to accept his proposal. When I refused, he became violent." She touched her temple where the wound had healed, leaving a faint scar. "This was his parting gift before he left me to die in the desert." Miller frowned deeply. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Ellis." "I'm aware, Sheriff. It's also the truth." "Why didn't you tell me this when we first met?" "Because I was afraid," Faith admitted. "Afraid he would find me. Afraid no one would believe me over a man of his standing. I've seen how the law favors men like Gerard." The sheriff looked troubled. "Where I come from, we don't tolerate men who beat women regardless of their standing, but without witnesses." "There are the bruises Mrs. Patterson documented," Royce interjected. "And the rope marks on her wrists." Miller nodded slowly. "That's something, at least. What would you have me do, Miss Ellis? I can't simply ignore an official inquiry." Faith hesitated, clearly weighing her limited options. Tell him you found no trace of me, that no one matching my description has been seen in Deeming." "That would be lying to an official inquiry," the sheriff pointed out, though his tone lacked conviction. "It would be protecting an innocent woman," Royce countered. Miller sighed heavily, looking between them. "I don't like being put in this position. I understand, Faith said softly, and I wouldn't ask if there were any other way, but if Gerard finds me. She couldn't finish the sentence. The sheriff was silent for a long moment, his weathered face troubled. Finally, he nodded. All right. I'll reply that we've had no reports of a woman matching your description, but Miss Ellis, if he comes here himself to search, there's little I can do to stop him. Thank you, Sheriff, Faith said with genuine gratitude. That's all I can ask. After Miller departed, Faith collapsed onto the porch steps, her brief show of strength evaporating. He'll come, she whispered. Gerard won't be satisfied with a telegram. He'll come himself. Royce sat beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance despite his desire to comfort her. Then we'll be ready. Faith looked at him with disbelief. You can't fight him, Royce, not because of me. I'm not suggesting violence, he assured her, though the idea held appeal. But you can't keep running forever, Faith. What choice do I have? My word against his, and he has money, influence, friends, and government. You have friends, too, Royce said quietly. People here who have seen your character, Mrs. Patterson, the Millers, me. Faith's expression softened. You've all been so kind, but I can't ask you to put yourselves at risk. Gerard is dangerous when crossed. So am I, Royce said simply. Their eyes met in the darkness, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Whatever came, they would face it together. The next morning, Royce rode into town while Faith remained at the ranch, supposedly to avoid the heat, but actually to stay hidden from curious eyes. At the general store, he casually inquired about recent visitors to Deeming. No strangers lately, Mr. Thompson reported as he measured out coffee beans. Though Martha Miller mentioned some Eastern fellow might be coming through, looking for a missing lady friend. Word traveled fast in small towns. Royce nodded non-committally. That's so. When's he expected? Don't rightly know. Could be days, could be weeks. Thompson leaned forward conspiratorially. Say, that gal you rescued, she wouldn't be the one he's looking for, would she? Can't say, Royce replied evenly. Miss Ellis is still recovering her memory. It was a weak deflection, but Thompson seemed satisfied. Royce completed his purchases and was heading to his wagon when Sheriff Miller intercepted him. Vance. Got a minute? They stepped into the shade of the livery stable, away from prying ears. Sent that telegram as promised, Miller said quietly. Got a response this morning. Blackstone's coming himself. Train arrives day after tomorrow. Royce cursed under his breath. That was fast. Too fast for my liking, Miller agreed. Man seems mighty determined for someone who supposedly believes his fiancé might be dead. Almost as if he knows she isn't, Royce suggested. The sheriff's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. You believe Miss Ellis's story then, don't you? Miller sighed. I want to. She seems a decent sort. But I've been fooled before. He studied Royce intently. You've grown fond of her. It wasn't a question. Royce didn't bother denying it. She deserves better than what Blackstone did to her. Maybe so. But my job is to uphold the law, not decide who deserves what. Miller placed a hand on Royce's shoulder. Be careful, Vance. Don't do anything that'll force me to arrest you. The warning was clear. Royce nodded his understanding and headed home, his mind racing. 2 days wasn't much time to prepare. Faith took the news with remarkable composure. I've been expecting this, she said, her hands steady as she kneaded dough for bread. Gerard isn't a man who gives up easily, especially when his pride is wounded. Tell me about him, Royce requested. The more I know, the better we can prepare. Faith continued her baking, the rhythmic motion seeming to calm her as she spoke. Gerard Blackstone, 43 years old, inherited his father's shipping business in Philadelphia. Widowed 3 years ago, his wife died under questionable circumstances. Royce frowned. Questionable how? She fell down a staircase. The servants whispered she'd been pushed after confronting him about his affairs, but of course nothing came of it. Gerard has friends in high places. Faith's voice was matter-of-fact, but her knuckles were white as she punched the dough. He began calling on me 6 months ago. My mother had just died, and our financial situation was precarious. He presented himself as a concerned friend of the family, offering support during a difficult time. But his intentions weren't honorable, Royce guessed. Faith laughed bitterly. Oh, they were entirely honorable on the surface. He proposed marriage within a month. When I declined, he persisted, becoming more insistent, said a woman in my position couldn't afford to be particular. Your position, penniless, orphaned, unmarried at 26. Faith shaped the dough into a loaf with quick, efficient movements. When I still refused, he changed tactics, started spreading rumors about my character, making it difficult for me to find employment, cut off what few social connections I had left, isolated me completely. Royce felt a familiar anger building. And no one helped you. A few tried. My cousin Thomas offered me a place in his home in San Francisco. I accepted, eager to escape. Faith fell silent, focused on her task. But Blackstone found out, Royce prompted gently. She nodded. He intercepted me at the train station, claiming he'd escort me west himself. I couldn't make a scene without risking my reputation further. We traveled as far as Santa Fe before I realized he had no intention of delivering me to my cousin. When I confronted him, her voice faltered. He beat you, Royce finished, his voice hard. Yes. Then he tied me up, threw me in a rented wagon, and drove far into the desert. He left me there to die, saying if he couldn't have me, no one would. Faith's composure finally cracked. I managed to free one hand and eventually the rest of me, but I was disoriented, without water or protection from the sun. I walked for what felt like days. Then, nothing until I woke up here. The simple telling made the horror all the more stark. Royce fought to control his rage, keeping his voice calm for Faith's sake. Did anyone witness any of this? The attack in Santa Fe, the journey into the desert? Faith shook her head. Gerard is careful, always. She placed the bread in a pan, her task complete. Now you understand why I can't face him. It would be my word against his, and he's very convincing. We'll find a way, Royce assured her, though he wasn't at all certain how. I won't let him hurt you again. Faith looked up at him, her eyes filled with a complex mixture of fear, gratitude, and something deeper that made Royce's heart beat faster. Why are you doing this, Royce? Taking such a risk for someone you barely know? The question deserved an honest answer. Because I know what it's like to be powerless, to watch someone you care about suffer and be unable to stop it. He held her gaze steadily. And because I've come to care for you, Faith. More than I should, perhaps. A flush spread across her cheeks, but she didn't look away. I've come to care for you too, she admitted softly. That's why I can't bear the thought of Gerard hurting you because of me. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Royce wanted nothing more than to cross the distance separating them, to take her in his arms and promise that everything would be all right. But such promises would be empty until Blackstone was dealt with. We have 2 days, he said instead. Let's make them count. They spent the remainder of the day planning. Faith would remain at the ranch while Royce went to town to meet Blackstone's train, accompanied by Sheriff Miller. They would gauge the man's temperament and intentions before deciding next steps. If he seems reasonable, perhaps I could speak with him, Faith suggested without conviction. Convince him to let me go peacefully. Men like that don't change, Royce said grimly, and I won't risk you facing him alone. That night, unable to sleep, Royce stepped outside to clear his head. The desert night was cool and still, stars scattered like diamond dust across the vast sky. He'd always found peace in this solitude, but now he found himself longing for Faith's company instead. As if summoned by his thoughts, the door creaked behind him. Faith stood there in her borrowed nightgown and shawl, her hair loose around her shoulders. "I couldn't sleep," she explained unnecessarily. "Neither could I," Royce admitted. She moved to stand beside him, close enough that their arms nearly touched. They gazed at the stars in companionable silence for several minutes. "I used to think I'd never feel safe again," Faith said quietly. "After what Gerard did, I was always looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next blow to fall. But here with you." She turned to face him. "You've given me back more than my life, Royce. You've given me hope." The raw emotion in her voice undid him. Without thinking, Royce reached for her, drawing her gently into his arms. Faith came willingly, resting her head against his chest as if she belonged there. He could feel her heart racing, matching the frantic rhythm of his own. "Faith," he murmured, his voice rough with feeling. "If we get through this when," she corrected, looking up at him with surprising fierceness. "When we get through this." "When," he agreed, captivated by the determination in her eyes. "I want you to stay. Not because you need protection or have nowhere else to go, but because you want to. Because we could build something here together." Faith's eyes widened at his near proposal. For a terrifying moment, Royce thought he'd overstepped, moved too quickly. Then her face softened into a smile of such radiance it took his breath away. "I'd like that," she whispered. "Very much." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Royce lowered his head until his lips met hers in a gentle kiss. Faith responded with unexpected passion, her arms winding around his neck as she pressed closer. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness dissolving in the warmth of their embrace. When they finally parted, both breathing unsteadily, Royce rested his forehead against hers. "I'll keep you safe," he promised. "Whatever it takes." "I know," Faith replied softly. "But Royce, promise me you won't do anything reckless. I couldn't bear losing you now." He wanted to promise, but they both knew the confrontation with Blackstone was inevitable. "I'll be careful," he said instead. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." Faith nodded, reluctantly stepping back from his embrace. At the doorway, she paused, looking back at him with eyes that held a future he'd never dared imagine. "Good night, Royce." "Good night, Faith." After she disappeared inside, Royce remained under the stars, his mind clearer than it had been in years. Whatever happened with Blackstone, he now had something precious to protect, not just Faith's safety, but the promise of a life together. For that, he would risk everything. The following day passed in tense preparation. Royce rode into town to speak with Sheriff Miller, who had received another telegram from Blackstone confirming his imminent arrival. "Man's determined, I'll give him that," Miller commented, handing Royce the message to read. "Arriving tomorrow's stop, expect full cooperation in locating my fiancé. Stop reward. Offered for information. Stop G. Blackstone. He's trying to buy witnesses," Royce observed grimly. Miller nodded. "Already had 3 people claim they might have seen Miss Ellis, hoping for that reward money. This town's too small for secrets, Vance. Someone's bound to talk. Then we need to be ready when he arrives." Royce outlined his plan. He would come to town alone to meet Blackstone's train, while Faith remained safely hidden at the ranch. "I just want to see the man for myself before deciding next steps." "And what exactly are these next steps you're contemplating?" Miller asked warily. "Nothing illegal, Sheriff," Royce assured him. "I just want to convince Blackstone that continuing his search is pointless." Miller looked skeptical but didn't press. "I'll be there when the train arrives. Official capacity." Royce nodded his appreciation. Having the sheriff present would help keep his own temper in check when facing the man who had nearly killed Faith. On his way home, Royce stopped at the telegraph office and sent a message to an old war comrade now practicing law in Santa Fe. If things went badly with Blackstone, they might need legal assistance. Faith was waiting anxiously on the porch when he returned. What did the sheriff say? He'll be there tomorrow when Blackstone arrives. Royce dismounted, securing his horse before joining her. Faith, there's something I need to ask. Do you have any proof of what Blackstone did to you? Letters, documents, anything? She shook her head regretfully. Nothing concrete. He was always careful to maintain appearances in public. What about your cousin in San Francisco? Could he corroborate your account? Thomas knew I was afraid of Gerard, but I never told him the full extent of it. Faith looked away, embarrassed. I was too ashamed. Royce took her hand gently. You have nothing to be ashamed of. I know that now, she said, squeezing his hand. But at the time, I believed I must have done something to deserve Gerard's obsession. That's what he wanted me to think. We'll find a way to make him leave you alone, Royce promised, though the path forward remained unclear. That evening they shared a quiet meal, both too preoccupied with thoughts of tomorrow to maintain conversation. After cleaning up, Faith disappeared into the bedroom and returned with a small object in her hand. I almost forgot, she said, holding it out to Royce. I've been keeping this hidden since I arrived. It may help prove my story. In her palm lay a heavy gold ring featuring an ornate crest, clearly a man's signet ring. Royce took it carefully, examining the intricate design. Blackstone's, Faith nodded. It fell from his finger when he struck me that last time. I grabbed it instinctively before he left me in the desert. I thought, if I died, someone might find it with my body and connect it back to him. Royce closed his hand around the ring, a surge of hope rising. This is evidence, Faith. Proof that you were with him, at least. It's his family crest, Faith confirmed. Been in his family for generations. He values it above almost anything. A plan began forming in Royce's mind. Would he recognize it immediately, from a distance? Absolutely. He never removed it except. She blushed slightly. Well, he wasn't wearing it when he attacked me. Royce nodded, tucking the ring into his pocket. This might give us leverage. Faith looked concerned. Be careful, Royce. The ring will only make him angrier. Good, Royce said grimly. Angry men make mistakes. Morning arrived all too quickly. Royce dressed with care, strapping on his gun belt and tucking Blackstone's ring into his vest pocket. Faith stood in the doorway, pale but composed. Remember what we discussed, Royce said, taking her hands in his. Stay inside, doors locked. If I'm not back by sunset, take the spare horse and ride to the miller's, Faith finished. But you will come back. I will, he promised, drawing her close for a brief, fierce kiss. This will end today one way or another. The train was scheduled to arrive at noon. Royce reached town by 11, finding the platform already buzzing with curious onlookers drawn by rumors of the wealthy Easterner searching for his missing fiancé. Sheriff Miller stood near the station house, looking uncomfortable in his formal attire. He nodded as Royce approached. Quite a turnout for a Wednesday. Word travels fast, Royce observed dryly. Too fast, Miller agreed. Half the town's convinced they are about to witness a romantic reunion, the other half's hoping for a showdown. Royce's hand unconsciously moved to the gun at his hip. Let's hope they're all disappointed. As the distant whistle of the approaching train sounded, Miller placed a restraining hand on Royce's arm. Remember, whatever this Blackstone fellow did, we handle it legally. Clear, Crystal, Royce replied, though inwardly he made no such promise. If legal means failed to protect Faith, he was prepared to take other measures. The train pulled into the station in a cloud of steam and coal smoke. Passengers began disembarking, first a young couple, then an elderly man, followed by a harried-looking woman with 3 children. Finally, a tall, distinguished-looking gentleman in an expensive suit descended from the first-class car. Even without Faith's description, Royce would have recognized Gerard Blackstone immediately. Everything about him exuded wealth and authority, from his immaculately tailored clothing to his confident stride. He was handsome in a cold, aristocratic way, his dark hair graying attractively at the temples. But it was his eyes that confirmed Faith's account, pale blue and utterly devoid of warmth. They scanned the platform with calculating precision. Sheriff Miller stepped forward, extending his hand. "Mr. Blackstone, Sheriff John Miller, welcome to Deeming." Blackstone's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Sheriff, thank you for meeting me." His gaze shifted to Royce, sharpening with interest. "And you are?" "Royce Vance, local rancher. Mr. Vance has been helping with inquiries about your missing fiancé," Miller explained smoothly. "How kind," Blackstone said, his tone suggesting anything but gratitude. "Though as I understand from your telegram, there's been no sign of Faith in Deeming." "Not to my knowledge," Miller replied carefully. Blackstone studied them both, clearly skeptical. "I find that surprising. Faith couldn't have traveled far on foot, and Deeming is the nearest settlement to where we were separated." "Perhaps you could tell us exactly what happened," Royce suggested, struggling to keep his tone neutral. "Might help narrow the search." Blackstone's expression became appropriately grave. "A tragic accident. We were traveling by private coach when one of our horses was spooked by a rattlesnake. The coach overturned. I was knocked unconscious briefly. When I came to, Faith was gone, perhaps disoriented from a head injury. I've been searching ever since." The lie was delivered with perfect sincerity. Royce had to admire the man's composure, even as he fought the urge to call him out as the liar he was. "That's quite different from what we heard," Royce said instead, watching Blackstone closely. A flicker of unease crossed the older man's face. "Oh. And what exactly did you hear, Mr. Vance?" Sheriff Miller intervened before Royce could respond. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. My office is just down the street." Blackstone nodded agreement, though his gaze remained fixed on Royce. "By all means." The walk to the sheriff's office was tense, with curious townsfolk following at a discreet distance. Once inside, Miller closed the door against prying ears and offered Blackstone a seat. "Now, Mr. Blackstone," the sheriff began, "as I mentioned in my telegram, we've had no official reports of a woman matching your fiancé's description. However, there have been rumors." Blackstone leaned forward eagerly. "What kind of rumors?" "That a woman was found in the desert some weeks back," Miller said carefully, "half dead from exposure." "Where is she now?" Blackstone demanded, all pretense of casualness gone. "I must see her immediately." "The woman in question has no recollection of being engaged," Royce interjected. "In fact, she has a very different account of how she came to be abandoned in the desert." Blackstone's expression hardened. "I see. And where might I find this woman to hear her account?" "That's the problem," Miller said. "She's not in Deeming, moved on weeks ago according to my information." It was the story they'd agreed upon that Faith had recovered and continued to California. A blatant lie, but one that might convince Blackstone to take his search elsewhere. Disappointment and anger flashed across Blackstone's face before he controlled his features. "I don't believe you, Sheriff. My sources indicate Faith is still in the area." His cold gaze shifted to Royce. "Perhaps even staying at your ranch, Mr. Vance." Royce felt a chill at the revelation that Blackstone had already been making inquiries. "Your sources are mistaken, are they?" Blackstone smiled thinly. "Then you won't mind if I visit your property to see for myself?" "Actually, I would mind," Royce said evenly. "Private property." "Now, gentlemen," Sheriff Miller intervened, "let's keep this civil. Mr. Blackstone, I understand your concern, but I can't authorize a search of Mr. Vance's property without cause." Blackstone's composure slipped momentarily, revealing the rage beneath. "My fiancé is missing, possibly being held against her will. That's not sufficient cause." "Not without evidence," Miller replied firmly. "Evidence?" Blackstone laughed bitterly. "Very well." He reached into his jacket, producing a folded paper. "A telegram from a Mrs. Patterson of Deeming responding to my reward offer. She claims to have tended to a young woman matching Faith's description at Vance's ranch. A woman with injuries consistent with the accident I described." Royce silently cursed. Mrs. Patterson had betrayed them, tempted by the reward money. Or perhaps simply unable to maintain the lie when directly questioned. Miller took the telegram, reading it with a frown before passing it to Royce. "This changes things." "Indeed it does," Blackstone said smoothly. "Now, Sheriff, I believe you have sufficient cause to accompany me to Mr. Vance's ranch. Or shall I telegraph the territorial governor? I assure you, he's a personal friend." The threat wasn't subtle. Miller looked uncomfortable but nodded reluctantly. "Mr. Vance, I'm afraid I must ask you to take us to your property." Royce's mind raced. Faith was alone at the ranch, expecting him to return with news, not bringing Blackstone directly to her doorstep. But refusing would only delay the inevitable and might result in Miller arresting him for obstruction. "Fine," he said finally, "but I ride ahead. Need to see to my cattle before leaving the property unattended." It was a weak excuse, but he needed to warn Faith. Blackstone opened his mouth to object, but Miller intervened. "That's reasonable. Mr. Blackstone and I will follow in my wagon. Say half an hour behind you." Royce nodded gratefully. "I'll be ready for visitors by then." Blackstone's eyes narrowed with suspicion, but he didn't argue further. "Very well. But Sheriff, I expect your full cooperation if Mr. Vance attempts to hide my fiancée or help her escape." "You'll have it," Miller promised, though his expression suggested otherwise. Royce left immediately, mounting his horse and riding hard for the ranch. His mind whirled with desperate plans. They could saddle the horses and head for the mountains. But that would make them fugitives, with the law obligated to pursue them. Faith deserved better than a life on the run. No, they would have to face Blackstone, but on their terms, not his. Faith was waiting anxiously when he galloped into the yard. "Royce, what happened? You're back so soon." He dismounted quickly, taking her hands. "Blackstone's here. He knows you're with me, Mrs. Patterson told him. He and the sheriff are coming here within the hour." The color drained from Faith's face. "No," she whispered. "No, it can't be." "Listen to me," Royce said urgently. "We don't have much time. Do you trust me?" Faith nodded without hesitation. "With my life." "Then here's what we'll do." By the time Sheriff Miller's wagon appeared in the distance, Royce and Faith were ready. They stood together on the porch, hands clasped but faces composed. Faith wore the simple blue dress from Sunday services, her hair neatly arranged, looking every inch a respectable woman with nothing to hide. As the wagon drew closer, Royce squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Remember, you're not alone anymore." Faith took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "I know. No matter what happens now, Royce, these weeks with you have been worth everything." Before he could respond, the wagon pulled into the yard. Blackstone jumped down before it fully stopped, his cold eyes fixing on Faith with an intensity that made Royce step protectively closer to her. "Faith," Blackstone called, his voice falsely warm. "Thank God you're alive." "I've been frantic with worry." Faith's grip on Royce's hand tightened painfully, but her voice was steady when she replied. "Hello, Gerard." Blackstone approached the porch, arms outstretched as if expecting Faith to run into them. When she didn't move, his expression hardened. "You've caused quite a commotion, my dear. Everyone back home thinks you're dead." "That was your intention, wasn't it?" Faith replied calmly. Blackstone laughed dismissively, glancing at Sheriff Miller, who had joined them. "You see, Sheriff, just as I feared. The head injury has confused her memories." "I remember everything perfectly, Gerard," Faith said, her voice growing stronger. "I remember you beating me unconscious in Santa Fe. I remember waking tied up in a wagon. And I remember you leaving me in the desert to die after I refused, yet again, to marry you." Blackstone's false smile disappeared. "Preposterous. Faith, you're my fiancé. We were traveling to meet your cousin when the accident occurred. Why would I harm the woman I love?" "We were never engaged," Faith stated firmly. "I rejected your proposal multiple times. You couldn't accept that, so you decided if you couldn't have me, no one would." Sheriff Miller looked between them uncertainly. "These are serious accusations, Miss Ellis." "Yes, they are," Faith agreed. "And I stand by them." Blackstone's composure cracked, anger flashing in his pale eyes. "This is absurd. Sheriff, I demand you arrest this man for kidnapping my fiancée and filling her head with these delusions." Miller hesitated. "Mr. Blackstone, without evidence either way, evidence." Blackstone snarled. "Look at her. She's clearly been coerced by this rancher." He spat the word like an insult. "Who knows what he's done to her, alone out here for weeks?" "Mr. Vance saved my life," Faith said quietly. "After you tried to end it, lies." Blackstone took a threatening step forward, causing Royce to move protectively in front of Faith. "She's coming back with me today, Sheriff, one way or another." "That's not your decision to make," Royce said evenly. "Faith is a free woman, not your property." Blackstone sneered. "And what will she do? Stay here with you, play at being a rancher's wife? Don't be ridiculous. Faith was born to privilege, educated in the finest schools. She belongs in Philadelphia, not this God-forsaken wilderness." "I belong wherever I choose," Faith said, stepping beside Royce. "And I choose to stay here." Sheriff Miller cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Miss Ellis, are you saying you're here of your own free will, not being forced or coerced?" "Absolutely," Faith confirmed. "Mr. Vance has been nothing but respectful and kind." "This is absurd," Blackstone fumed. "Sheriff, I have documentation proving Faith is my fiancée." He reached into his jacket, producing an envelope. "Our engagement announcement, prepared for the Philadelphia Inquirer before our departure. Letters from Faith expressing her affection." "Forgeries," Faith said dismissively. "Gerard is well practiced at imitating my handwriting. Check the dates, they're all after my mother died, when I was supposedly falling in love with him. Yet I was in mourning, seeing no one socially." Doubt flickered across Miller's face as he examined the papers. "These do seem rather formal for love letters." "Of course they're formal. Faith was raised to be proper in all things," Blackstone insisted, his desperation becoming evident. "Sheriff, I've come a long way to retrieve my fiancée. I expect your assistance, not your skepticism." "What about the ring, Gerard?" Faith asked suddenly. Blackstone froze. "What ring?" "Your family signet. The one that fell from your finger when you struck me." Faith's voice was steady, though Royce could feel her trembling beside him. "The one you never remove, that's been passed down through generations of Blackstone men." Instinctively, Blackstone's hand moved to his bare finger. I lost it in the accident, when the coach overturned." Royce reached into his vest pocket, withdrawing the heavy gold ring. "This ring?" The effect was immediate. Blackstone lunged forward, face contorted with rage. "Where did you get that?" "Thief," Sheriff Miller intercepted him, holding him back. "Easy now, Mr. Blackstone." "I took it," Faith said clearly. "After you left me to die, I thought if someone found my body, the ring might lead them back to you." Blackstone struggled against Miller's restraint. "She's lying. She stole it from me while I was unconscious after the accident." "Then how did you know it was missing when you woke up?" Royce asked quietly. "If you were so concerned about Faith wandering off injured, wouldn't finding her be your first priority, not checking for your ring?" It was a simple question, but it stopped Blackstone cold. His eyes darted between Faith, Royce, and the sheriff, calculating. "Furthermore," Faith added, "if we really had an accident as you claim, where exactly did it happen? Where's the wrecked coach, the spooked horses?" I had to abandon the coach. It was destroyed," Blackstone stammered. His composure fracturing, Sheriff Miller released him slowly, his expression hardening. "Mr. Blackstone, I think you'd better come back to town with me. We have some more questions to sort through. This is outrageous." Blackstone exploded. "I am Gerard Blackstone of Philadelphia. I will not be treated like a common criminal based on the hysterical accusations of a confused woman and her lover." He spat the last word with venom. "No one's arresting you, Mr. Blackstone," Miller said calmly. "But until we sort this out, Miss Ellis stays here of her own free will." Blackstone's face contorted with rage. With surprising speed for a man his age, he reached inside his jacket and withdrew a small Derringer pistol, aiming it directly at Faith. "If I can't have her, no one will," he snarled. Everything happened in an instant. Royce shoved Faith behind him as Miller reached for his own weapon. But Blackstone was already squeezing the trigger, his aim shifting to Royce instead. The shot rang out, deafeningly loud in the quiet ranch yard. Royce felt a burning pain across his upper arm as the bullet grazed him. Before Blackstone could fire again, Sheriff Miller tackled him to the ground, the small pistol flying from his hand. "Royce," Faith cried, rushing to his side. "You're hurt." "Just a graze," he assured her, though blood was already soaking his shirt sleeve. "I'm all right." On the ground, Miller struggled to subdue the surprisingly strong Blackstone, who fought with the desperate fury of a cornered animal. "Vance, a little help here." Ignoring the pain in his arm, Royce moved quickly to assist, helping Miller pin Blackstone's arms behind his back. The older man continued to struggle, spewing threats and obscenities. "You'll regret this," he shouted as Miller secured handcuffs around his wrists. "I have friends in the territorial government. In Washington. You'll all pay for this humiliation. Add attempted murder to your problems," Miller said grimly, hauling Blackstone to his feet. "Threatening a woman and shooting a man in front of the sheriff not your smartest move, Mr. Blackstone." Faith had retreated to the porch, her face pale but composed. Blackstone glared at her with naked hatred. "This isn't over, Faith. You think you can hide in this backwater forever? I'll find you. I'll always find you." "No, Gerard," Faith said quietly. "It is over. You have no power over me anymore." Sheriff Miller muscled Blackstone toward the wagon. "I'm taking him back to town, Vance. Get that arm looked at." He nodded respectfully to Faith. "Miss Ellis, I'll need your formal statement tomorrow if you're up to it." "I'll be there," Faith promised. As Miller drove away with his prisoner, Faith hurried to Royce's side. "Let me see that arm." Inside, she cleaned and bandaged the wound with gentle efficiency. "It's not deep," she pronounced with relief, "but it'll be sore for a while." Royce caught her hand as she finished tying the bandage. "You were amazing out there, standing up to him like that." Faith smiled tremulously. "I was terrified, but having you beside me made me brave." "You've always been brave," Royce corrected, drawing her closer. "You survived what he did to you. You rebuilt your strength. That took courage most men don't have." Faith's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "What happens now? Gerard still has influence connections. Will a jury here really convict him on my testimony alone?" The attempted murder happened in front of the sheriff, Royce pointed out. That's pretty clear-cut, and I telegraphed a lawyer friend in Santa Fe yesterday. He'll be here tomorrow to help build a proper case. Faith looked surprised. You did that? Before knowing how today would unfold, Royce nodded. I wanted to be prepared, whatever happened. He hesitated, then added softly, I meant what I said before. I want you to stay, Faith, not out of necessity but choice. If you want to go to your cousin in San Francisco, I'd understand. But if you stayed— If I stayed, she prompted when he trailed off. If you stayed, I'd spend every day trying to make you happy. The words were simple but heartfelt. I love you, Faith. I think I have since I found you in that desert. Faith's eyes widened, her breath catching. Then she smiled a radiant, joyful smile that transformed her entire face. I love you too, Royce. I want to stay, to build a life here with you. He pulled her into his arms, careful of his injured shoulder, and kissed her with all the tenderness and passion he'd held in check for weeks. Faith responded eagerly, her arms encircling his neck as she pressed herself against him. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, Royce rested his forehead against hers. We should probably wait until Blackstone's dealt with before making any permanent arrangements, he said reluctantly. Faith smiled, mischief dancing in her eyes. Probably, but that doesn't mean we can't start planning our future. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Royce's lawyer friend, Jacob Stern, arrived from Santa Fe and took charge of Faith's case with impressive efficiency. Blackstone was formally charged with attempted murder, kidnapping, and assault. Despite his threats and blustering, the evidence against him was damning, especially after Sheriff Miller located the abandoned wagon Blackstone had used, complete with Faith's blood on the floorboards and scraps of rope matching the marks on her wrists. Additional telegrams to San Francisco brought Faith's cousin, Thomas West, to testify about Blackstone's obsessive behavior. Two former servants of Blackstone's household, contacted by Stern, agreed to testify about his violent tendencies and the suspicious circumstances surrounding his first wife's death. Through it all, Faith remained strong, testifying clearly and calmly despite Blackstone's intimidating presence in the courtroom. The women of Deeming rallied around her, led by Mrs. Patterson, who tearfully apologized for betraying their confidence. I never intended harm, the older woman explained. When that telegram arrived offering a reward, I thought I was helping reunite a worried fiancé with his beloved. Had I known the truth. You couldn't have known, Faith assured her graciously. Gerard has fooled many people more suspicious than you. 3 months after his arrival in Deeming, Gerard Blackstone was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. As he was led from the courtroom, he fixed one last venomous glare on Faith and Royce. I'll never stop, he hissed. Never. But his threats now rang hollow. With his reputation destroyed and his crimes exposed, Blackstone's influence had evaporated. Even his business partners in Philadelphia had disavowed him, according to Thomas Ellis's contacts back east. He can't hurt you anymore, Royce assured Faith as they left the courthouse together. It's really over. Faith squeezed his hand, her face serene. It was over the moment you found me in that desert, Royce. I just didn't know it yet. The following Sunday, Faith Ellis and Royce Vance were married in Deeming's small church, with the entire town in attendance. Faith wore a simple cream-colored dress that Martha Miller and her daughter had helped sew. Royce, uncomfortable but handsome in a new suit, couldn't take his eyes off his bride as they spoke their vows. Sheriff Miller stood as Royce's best man, while Mrs. Patterson, fully redeemed in Faith's eyes, served as matron of honor. Thomas Ellis, Faith's only living relative, gave her away with proud tears in his eyes. "Your parents would be overjoyed to see you so loved," he whispered as he placed her hand in Royce's. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with the townsfolk who had once viewed Royce as a reclusive stranger now embracing him and his bride as their own. Even Mrs. Thompson, the shopkeeper's notoriously critical wife, admitted they made a handsome pair, despite the unusual circumstances. When they finally returned to the ranch, their home, Royce carried Faith across the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vance," he said, setting her gently on her feet. Faith's eyes shone with happiness as she looked around the small house that had sheltered her recovery and witnessed their growing love. "It already feels like home," she said softly. "Has since the beginning." That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other anew, their lovemaking tender and passionate by turns. Afterward, Faith lay in Royce's arms, her head pillowed on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness," she confessed. "After what happened with Gerard, I was afraid to trust anyone again." Royce stroked her hair gently. "And I never thought I'd open my heart after losing Robert. We both got a second chance at life." "Because you found me," Faith murmured sleepily, "half dead in the desert." "Best detour I ever took," Royce replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. In the years that followed, the Vance ranch prospered. With Faith's keen mind for business and education her progressive father had insisted upon, and Royce's practical knowledge of ranching, they expanded their holdings and improved their cattle stock. Within 5 years, they had one of the most successful operations in the territory. Their family grew as well. Their first child, a son they named Thomas Robert, arrived a year after their wedding. A daughter, Sarah Elizabeth, followed 2 years later. By their 7th anniversary, they had added twin boys, James and William, completing their family. Faith became a respected figure in Deeming, establishing the town's first proper library and organizing a school-building fund. Royce, though still more comfortable with cattle than committees, served a term as town councilman at Faith's urging, helping to bring more regular rail service to the growing community. On the 10th anniversary of the day Royce found Faith in the desert, they rode out together to the approximate location. The landscape remained harsh and unforgiving under the summer sun, but to them, it held a strange beauty, the place where both their lives had been forever changed. "It's hard to believe it's been 10 years, Faith said, shading her eyes as she surveyed the empty expanse. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago, other times like yesterday." "Do you ever regret it?" Royce asked. "Staying here instead of going to San Francisco?" "You could have had a different life, city theaters, fine restaurants, society." Faith turned to him, her face more beautiful to him now, marked by a decade of shared joys and sorrows than it had been in her youth. "Never. Not for a single moment," he believed her. The hardships of ranch life, droughts, harsh winters, cattle disease had tested them both, but Faith had never complained. She'd faced each challenge with the same quiet determination she'd shown facing Blackstone, finding solutions where others saw only problems. "What about you?" she asked. "Do you ever regret picking up that half-dead woman in the desert?" Royce laughed, pulling her close. "Only when you insist I attend those interminable town council meetings." Faith swatted his arm playfully. "Those meetings built the new schoolhouse our children attend, I'll have you remember." "True enough," he conceded, growing serious. "No, Faith, no regrets. Finding you saved me as much as it saved you. I was existing, not living, until you came along." The sun was setting as they rode home, painting the desert in the same fiery colors that had surrounded them a decade earlier. But now, Instead of returning to an empty house, they were greeted by the joyful shouts of their children and the warm light of home. That night, with the children finally asleep, Faith and Royce sat on their expanded porch, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder as they watched the stars emerge. "When I was lying in that desert, certain I was going to die," Faith said softly, "I prayed for rescue, for a miracle. And instead you got a dusty cowboy," Royce teased. Faith lifted her head to look at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "No, Royce. I got exactly what I prayed for. You were my miracle. You still are." As he kissed her under the vast New Mexico sky, Royce Vance silently thanked whatever force had guided him to that particular stretch of desert on that fateful day. In saving Faith, he had found something he'd never expected to find again after the war: purpose, joy, love. A half-dead woman in the desert had given him back his life, and he would spend the rest of his days grateful for the second chance they'd both been granted. In the quiet embrace of the night, with his beloved wife in his arms and their children sleeping safely nearby, Royce knew with absolute certainty that sometimes life's harshest deserts could lead to its greatest blessings. And sometimes, in saving another, you find the way to save yourself.